Now, every single ancient civilization on this planet has definitely gone through the Bronze Age as part of its evolution. Now, however, only the ancient Chinese attach so much cultural, social, and even spiritual meaning and symbolism to bronzeware that goes far beyond their basic use as tools and daily implements. Now, this is shown especially in these implements called the bronze vessels or the ting, which are basically giant cooking pots that stood on 3 or 4 legs. Now, the biggest and most important piece of bronzeware was actually a ting or a bronze vessel known as the Simuwu大鼎 or the Simuwu giant bronze vessel. Now, it was created at the peak of Shang Dynasty Bronze Age culture, displaying the pinnacle of the scale and sophistication of Shang Dynasty bronze working technology and skills. Now, this tripod vessel can be said to be the indisputable symbol of Chinese Bronze Age culture, although its beginnings can be traced back to the clay and earthenware or pottery tripod vessels created by the Chinese, very early Chinese of the Neolithic period. So what's so special about this tripod vessel, and why is it such an important piece of ancient artifact that effectively affected how people look at ancient Bronze Age culture? Hello there and welcome to the show. My name is Apingo. I'm that Chinese history guy. Here we share the myths, legends and histories of the Chinese people from the first creator to the last imperial dynasty. More than 6,000 years of stories, one video at a time. And before we continue, please remember to give us a like, sub, comment and a share. Now, as mentioned earlier on in the introduction, these bronze things or these bronze vessels were an evolution of the early pottery vessels that were created during the Neolithic period. Now, the development of these seemingly mundane vessels reached its peak during the Shang and Western Zhou dynasty in Chinese history. And during the Shang dynasty, great importance was placed on these vessels as an integral part of worship and sacrificial rituals. And this trend continued throughout the Zhou dynasty and only really began to taper off during the Han dynasty, which was basically more than 1,000 years later. Now, of course, as mentioned, these vessels were originally created to be used as cooking and dining implements. Basically, they were just giant pots where you threw in all the meats and the vegetables, filled it up with water and you light a fire under it. So yeah, they were basically giant pots used for cooking and you eat directly out of these pots. But over time, they started taking on a more and more important role as ceremonial vessels that contain these sacred offerings and sacrifices which were made to their ancestors and during their worship of the heavens. Now, due to this new role as a vessel containing these sacrifices and offerings, due to the role that they played in society, these vessels became symbols of authority and mystical powers, taking on more and more gravitas in their symbolism over time. And soon, systems of rules and regulations sprang up around the ownership of and display of these vessels in relation to the rank and station of their owners. Now, it was a way to distinguish the nobles and the higher classes of society from basically the plebs and the common people. Now, today we know that the number of the vessels that each individual can own and display is strictly regulated. In fact, it was recorded that the kings shall have 9 vessels, vessel lords shall have 7. High officials of the court shall have 5, and the common bureaucrats shall display only 3 or 1. Now, this tradition of using these bronze vessels or these bronze things to display the status, to show the status of its owners, basically started, from the beginning of the Xia dynasty, when Yu the Great cast the 9 great bronze vessels from the bronze collected from all the clans of the land, and they were displayed in the capital as a show of power, as a symbol of the sovereignty, of the authority of the Xia dynasty kings. And of course, it was said that he who owns the 9 great vessels owns the land. And therefore, from that time onwards, actually a bit later, from the founding of the Shang Dynasty onwards to the Zhou Dynasty and every other dynasty after that, the term to settle the vessels, or ting ting, the term is used to mean the establishment of a new capital or even the founding of a new kingdom or dynasty. And when the Shang overthrew the Xia, the 9 vessels which Yu casted, like we mentioned earlier, the 9 vessels were moved to their new capital at Haocheng, and they were settled there. So so settling the vessels, that's where it came from. And when the Zhou replaced the Shang dynasty later, the vessels were once again moved to the new capital at Haojing, where they were settled once again. So settling the vessels basically means establishing a new capital or the founding of a new kingdom or a new dynasty. Now, for modern archaeologists, these vessels, they hold another very important significance. They are actually a great source of historical accounts and records of events that happened during that time. Now, many of these Shang and Zhou dynasty laws and the details of their worships and their battles and their wars were actually inscribed into the walls of these vessels to be passed down in perpetuity as a form of memorial. Now, it was also through these inscriptions that etymologists discovered the Zhou dynasty's large seal script, or 大篆, or it was also known as the bronze script, 经文. For obvious reasons, they were inscribed on bronze vessels, so they were known as bronze scripts. Now, although bronze inscriptions started appearing around the time of King Tanaka of the Shang dynasty, it really only developed and flourished during the Zhou dynasty. So to put it in context, during the Shang dynasty, the script they were known for were actually the oracle bone script, 甲骨文, and the Zhou dynasty was when the writing system developed and 经文, or the bronze script, became more matured and it was more established. Now, however, if we were to look purely at the scale and the level of sophistication in casting and the artistic value of these implements, then the indisputable representative of the ancient Chinese people's skills at bronze casting would be this piece called the 司母戊大鼎, or is also known as 后母戊鼎, which was produced about around 1200 to 1100 BCE. Now, the name of this bronze vessel and the time, the rough time period where it was produced is kind of still in dispute until today, and we will get into a bit more detail about this dispute towards later on in the video. But it's still, generally considered to be produced about the 1200 to 1100 BC era, and we will get into more detail later on. So, what's so special about this 司母戊 giant bronze vessel? For one, although most of the ceremonial vessels are 3-legged round containers, round vessels, the 司母戊 bronze vessel is the most famous of the 4-legged rectangular vessels. Now, it is also the biggest and heaviest piece of bronzeware that was excavated from anywhere on this planet. Okay, so yeah, it actually weighs in at 832.84 kilograms, and for our friends in the Americas, that's about 1,836.1 pounds. Yeah, one giant bronze vessel that weighs near the 2,000 pounds. And from the casting lines, researchers could tell that the vessel was constructed through the process of what I believe is called piece molding. Any one of you out there who are more knowledgeable about bronze casting, you might want to chime in. But this is what I could kind of figure out. Yeah, I tried my best, okay? So please correct me if I made any mistakes in this more technical part. So the scholars, based on what they saw, based on what they could discover, could tell that this vessel was constructed through the process of piece molding. Due to its extremely large size, the body of the vessel itself was constructed out of 8 separate pieces of ceramic molds, with the bottom of this body alone, taking up 4 pieces of molds, and the legs themselves were cast from each piece of leg was cast from 3 pieces of molds. So yeah, 8 pieces of mold for the body, 3 each for each leg. So 20 pieces of molds in total to cast this one vessel. Now, interestingly, the bronze that was used to cast this spectacular display of human craftsmanship of the era, the bronze that was used was an alloy of 84.77% copper, 11.64% tin, and 2.79% lead, which from what I understand, even in today's term, would be considered to be pretty good quality and pretty good standard of bronze. Now, the amount and the precision of the materials needed was actually a huge challenge in casting this behemoth. And because, based on archaeological finds, the ceramic crucibles that were used for melting bronze during the Shang Dynasty, these crucibles roughly held about 12.7 kilograms of molten metal each. And I mean, 12.7 kilos, it was a volume that's adequate for most casting needs. However, to melt enough bronze to cast the Simuwu giant bronze vessel, they would need to fire up almost 70 crucibles at the same time. And assuming an average of 3 to 4 craftsmen to control the fire, to control the melting and the pouring of each crucible, the entire endeavor would require the near perfect coordination of upwards of 300 top level bronze craftsmen and artisans, and all of them will be working in tandem at near perfect synchrony to create this pinnacle of bronzeware. Because for those of you who understand bronze casting, you can't cast it piece by piece. It has to be cast at one go. So yeah, more than 800 kilograms or more than 1,800 pounds of bronze would be melted and poured and cast at the same time. So yeah, and remember, this was accomplished about 1,200, 1,100 BCE. So wow. So when was the Simuwu giant bronze vessel discovered, and how was it unearthed? Now, the story goes that this司母戊大鼎was unearthed in Wuguan village in Anyang, Henan in March 1939 by a local farmer named Wu Xizheng. Now, after the oracle bones, which we spoke about in the previous episode, after they were discovered in Xiaotun village, also in Anyang, the nationalist government or the KMT government who were in charge at that time embarked on massive archaeological digs and excavations in the entire area, which actually stopped after 1937, when the Japanese invaded, during the Japanese invasion of China. Now, life under Japanese occupation would be difficult, to put it mildly, and food was hard to come by, and jobs, what jobs? Yeah, so in a way, a new form of profession sprang up in the area around Anyang. So what happened was that many of these local residents who were previously farmers and all kinds of villagers became treasure hunters. So what they did was that they went around digging in the land in Anyang, because it's by now well known to hold, ancient artifacts and antiques in the ground. So these treasure hunters started digging in the land for artifacts to be sold to, collectors or antique merchants at basically relatively low prices. All they need is just some money for them to buy food and survive, through this occupation period. And so a form of unwritten rule also sprang up, that there was an understanding that while these hunters were not restricted in where they could dig for these artifacts, the owners of the land where the artifacts were found were actually entitled to half of the profits that these treasure hunters would get from selling the artifacts that they found. Now, it was with this understanding that Wu Xizheng, that we mentioned earlier, Wu Xizheng, it was with this understanding that he began working on the lands of his cousin, a man by the name of Wu Peiwen. Now, Wu Xizheng started working in the night, and slightly after midnight, his probing stick, his probe rod, hit something hard about 10 meters in the ground, and he could not go any further. And when he retrieved this rod, he found that the blade tip, the tip of these probing rods were basically blades. So this blade tip have actually curved over and had actually scraped up some greenish bronze patina, and that was how he knew that he had struck gold. Pun not intended. And so Wu Xizheng, he immediately went back to his cousin to tell him about his find, and after some deliberations and consideration, they decided to round up some trusted friends, close friends, to attempt a recovery of the what Wu Xizheng found in the ground. And so that night, they took turns digging a hole just wide enough to accommodate a single person working, a hole that went straight down, to try and see what Wu Xizheng had found. And they finally struck metal, they finally struck bronze sometime near dawn. But however, they were unable to get a good look at what they have found, as it was simply too big and too heavy to haul it back up to the surface. And so, after swearing everyone on site to secrecy, Wu Xizheng camouflaged the hole, basically put some branches and covered it with leaf and loose soil. He camouflaged the hole and made plans for everyone to come back and continue their work that same night. And so on the night of the 16th of March 1939, the group returned, and they actually rounded up even more people from the village. And this time they had more than 30 helpers working in the dark to expand the hole that they made the previous night, to make it as large as possible, as quickly as possible. And around midnight on the 16th of March 1939, they finally saw what they had found under the dim light of the torches that they were carrying. Now, lying in the mud about 10 plus meters, under the surface area, was a giant bronze vessel with its opening towards the northeast, the legs towards the southwest, and one handle pointing to the sky. And they have a big problem now. How are they going to move such a giant, massive, heavy piece of artifact out of the ground? So over the next 3 nights, with the help of these more than 30 people who have been working on the site and 3 pack animals, they painstakingly drag the vessel out of this 13-meter deep hole, inch by inch, while elevating the bottom of the hole with, they lifted it up a bit, they filled out the bottom with soil, and they lifted it up a bit, and then they filled it out, and then they dragged it out of the hole, 13 meters deep, and who knows how much distance to the edge. And once they managed to get the whole thing out, Wu Xizheng then hid the vessel under a compost heap and went out to find a buyer for it. They had to hide it because, remember, guys, they are still living under Japanese occupation. And the thing is, although they worked in secret under the cover of night, and Wu Xizheng did a good job of, hiding this discovery, word of the discovery still got out, and more than 100 Japanese soldiers appeared in the village just after Wu Xizheng left to find a buyer. And fortunately, although these Japanese soldiers knew that the villagers found something, they had no idea what they found, and therefore they had no idea what they were looking for. So they ransacked Wu Peiwen's house, they ransacked it, turned it upside down, and when they couldn't find anything in there, they just left. Now, when Wu Xizheng, returned to the village, he came back with one of Beijing's, at the time it will be known as Beiping, if I'm not wrong. He returned with one of his premier antique merchants and a valuator, this person named Xiao Yinqing. Now, Xiao Yinqing saw what they have discovered, and he was so impressed with the find that on the spot he offered them 200,000 silver dollars to buy it, to take it off their hands. Now, how much is 200,000 silver dollars? Basically, if we convert it to today's currency, it would be roughly about 20 million US dollars today. Yeah. So they had made a $20 million fine. However, there was a slight problem. Xiao Yinqing's condition for the purchase of this artifact was that they had to cut this vessel into more than 40 little pieces for him to transport them back in pieces back to Beijing, where he would be able to find a buyer, where he would be able to sell it on. And he, of course, made a promise to return with the money while they proceed with cutting up this giant bronze vessel. Now, the villagers, of course, they were ecstatic. I mean, 20 million bucks, it could feed the entire village for like, damn, I have no idea how long it will feed the village, but it's definitely a long time. Most probably they will be settled for the rest of their lives. So of course they got to trying attempting to cut up this giant bronze vessel. However, they went through dozens and dozens of saw blades without as much as leaving a scratch on the Simuwu thing. And so they thought that, yeah, since we can't saw it apart, let's smash it apart. So they brought giant sledgehammers to try to break it apart instead. But when they finally managed to break off one of the handles, or we call it one of the ears of this vessel, they suddenly, felt a bit tentative about the whole exercise. They suddenly thought like, what if the buyer don't return? What if he does not return with the money? Would we have, destroyed a priceless artifact for no reason? And with that thought in mind, they decided to once again hide the vessel in a safe place and will only proceed with the cutting up or the parting out of this artifact after the money is safely in their hands. But Xiao Yinqing, the antique merchant, never showed up in the village again. Now, although the merchant did not return with the money, never returned, disappeared, never to be heard of again, the Japanese came back again. So once again, they heard of a transaction going on regarding a historical artifact, and they made a return to the village. And in a bid to misdirect the Japanese, these villagers, they moved the vessel to a new hiding place, and they replaced this vessel with some lower value artifacts they either bought from somewhere else or they dug up from other parts of the ground. They made a show of hiding these low value artifacts, and they hid the real treasure somewhere else. And this was a bit to, of course, misdirect the Japanese. And lo and behold, the Japanese soldiers found these artifacts, low value ones, and they thought that they had found what these villagers had discovered, and they finally left. For good or not is in dispute. There are a few different versions of the story, but let's say they left. And after this incident, fearing for his own life, because obviously by now he's being marked by the Japanese, Wu Peiwen left the village to hide in Jiangsu, and he only returned after the war ended. Now, after the war in the year 1946, the village, this area, this entire region was under the control of the nationalist 31st Army Group. And their commanding officer, Lieutenant General Wang Zhonglian, heard about this discovery, and he heard about this vessel. And he thought it would make a perfect birthday present for then KMT president, Mr. Chiang Kai-shek. So he took the vessel from the villagers, and he had the vessel transported to Nanjing, where it was placed in the care of the National Central Museum, which is today's Nanjing Museum. Now, the vessel was officially unveiled and displayed in public for the first time in the summer of 1948. However, by the spring of 1949, the nationalist government, the KMT, was already preparing for its retreat to Taiwan after being defeated by the communists in the Chinese Civil War, in a way. So by the it was first displayed in 1948 summer, and by spring 1949, the nationalist government was preparing for a retreat to Taiwan. And of course, they will be bringing a lot of these national treasures and artifacts with them to Taiwan. And of course, the Simuwu giant bronze vessel was amongst the national treasures to be brought along. But however, due to its massive size and weight, they could not load it onto the aeroplane, and it had to be left behind in the airport. And so when the PLA arrived at the airport, they found it sitting there in one of these halls, so they dragged it back to the Nanjing Museum, where it was kept until 1959, when it was moved once again to Beijing's newly established National Museum of China, where it is kept and preserved until today. Now, the handle that was broken off in 1939 was actually never recovered, and the conservators used the remaining handle, the remaining gear, as a template to recreate a new one to repair the damage that's done. So when you see this vessel in the National Museum of China now, one of the gears is actually a replica, it's not the original. So yeah, that's a little bit of trivia for you. So, what are the technical specifications of this giant bronze vessel that we've been talking about for so long? Now, the司母戊大鼎was also known, or rather is also known as the 后母戊鼎. We will get to that debate in a while, okay? It measures 133 cm or 52 inches in height, 110 cm or 43 inches wide, and 79 cm or 31 inches deep. And the weight, as we mentioned before, was 832.84 kilograms, which is about 1,836.1 pounds. Now, each side of this vessel, of this rectangular vessel, has a blank space in the middle, which was surrounded by a band of decoration featuring the Tao Tie or the Kui Long or one-legged dragons. And the two handles or the two ears were each decorated on the exterior with two tigers facing each other and their jaws closing around a human head in between them. And this was an image that's interestingly also found on Queen Fu Hao's battle axes. And if you want to know more about that, there's an episode on Queen Fu Hao. Most probably a link will be up here. Yeah. So, and the inscription Simuwu could be found on the inside of this vessel. Now, this is the controversy and the debate that has been raging on until today. The inscription found on the inside of the vessel was originally read as Simuwu, which means to worship Mother Wu. But since the 1970s, some scholars have reached the consensus that the first character should be read as Ho, which meant queen, and the writing is kind of like a mirror image of the word Si, of the character Si in Oracle Bone script, and therefore it should be known as a Ho Mu Wu Ding. Now this will cause some problems because the original reading of this inscription, Simu Wu Ding, would mean that the owner of this bronze vessel was supposed to have been a wife of King Wu Yi. We spoke about him before as well, who reigned roughly between 1147 to 1112 BCE. And the person who commissioned the creation of this thing would have been her son, King Wenting, who reigned between 1112 BC to 1102 BC. Now, however, if we read the inscription as Ho Mu Wu, it would then refer to another character entirely. It would make it the temple title of Fu Jing, who lived actually much earlier, and that would throw the whole ownership and the date of creation of this bronze vessel into a bit of a flux. Now, there is another school of thought that argues that the term Ho was actually not used as a title for a king's wife until the spring and autumn period, which would not happen for another 1,000 years basically, and it never appeared as a title in any of the oracle bones that has been discovered so far, and therefore it doesn't make sense to read it as Ho Mu Wu or to understand the term as a title, for queen. And it would make more sense, definitely, to read it as Si, or which is a simplification of the word Si, which will mean to worship. So, the dedication or the inscription on the bronze vessel would actually mean, in worship of my mother Wu. So yeah, it will make more sense in this case. Now, the debate between these two schools of thought has raged on, until today. There's still no conclusion to who is right and who is wrong. The correct interpretation of this inscription is still up in the air. And while the National Museum of China in Beijing has officially changed the name to Ho Mu Wu Ding, the National Museum of Chinese Writing, which basically is a museum for etymology, for writing, for words, for language, they still retain the use of the original name司母戊大鼎. So yeah, I don't know, would we actually see the end of this debate? Would we actually see a conclusion to this controversy in our lifetimes? We most probably would not. I don't know. What do you think? Well, yeah, that was a pretty long video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Now, if you did, don't forget to give us a like, sub, comment, and share. And if you would like to do more and support this little project in more tangible ways, you can do so on Patreon. The links are available at the description box down below. And here's a little shout out to our current patrons of the page. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You really help to keep the lights on around here, and you help, keep things going and keep things running. So thank you so much. You have no idea how much you are helping the channel out. And yeah, I guess that's it for today, and I will see you. Yeah, you. Don't turn around, that's you. Yeah, you beautiful people out there. I will see you in the next episode.